It's me, your buddy Dave from thedarkstuff.com and the Dark Stuff channel here on YouTube. Thanks for joining me for my latest video. In this video, we are going to do a deep dive, as it were, a catalog ranking of one of my favorite bands of all time, Boston legends Buffalo Tom. By the time you see this video, Buffalo Tom's 10th album, Jump Rope, will have been released. It's scheduled to be released on May 31st of 2024. And even though I knew a couple months ago that Buffalo Tom was going to be releasing a new album and that I wanted to do this catalog ranking, and this has been brewing for about 6 months, I decided to not include the new album in this. So I'm going to be, ranking their 9 previous albums. I just thought it was a little bit unfair to put something brand new that I would have only heard once or twice into the mix with the records maybe that I've heard for 30 and 35 years. It just didn't seem like that would be an accurate, placement no matter where I put it in the ranking. Also, I should point out that I like all 9 of these albums. Okay, Buffalo Tom has not made a bad record. They don't have their piece of shit. They don't have their turbo or whatever that where you're just like the band just goes off in some crazy direction. That never really happened with Buffalo Tom. So there's just varying degrees. So I want that understood. The 9th ranked album is not bad. It's just lower than the other 8, right? So for those unfamiliar, Buffalo Tom started in 1986 in the Boston-ish area, University of Massachusetts. The band has had the same lineup since the very beginning, okay? Bill Janovitz, guitar and vocals. Chris Colburn, bass, vocals. And drums, Tom McGinnis. Those 3 guys formed the band. They're still the band today. I first came across Buffalo Tom because they were part of the sort of second wave of SST Records bands. Okay, so the initial first wave, of course, Black Flag, Husker Du, Meat Puppets, etc. Those early hardcore records and punk rock records that came out on SST. By about 85, 86, they were venturing into stuff like Screaming Trees, Dinosaur Jr., Buffalo Tom, Soundgarden, Treacherous Jaywalkers, Tar Babies, a number of other really great bands at that second level. And then SST turned into kind of a vanity project for whatever Greg Ginn felt like doing at that moment. But I was pretty obsessed with SST Records in the 80s, and I do think it's safe to say it was probably the best record label in that period. They are from Massachusetts, and they're broadly considered part of the same scene that brought us Dinosaur Jr., the Pixies, Throwing Muses and Belly, who I know are not from Boston. Don't at me on that one. The Blake Babies and Juliana Hatfield. So many other bands. They are from that same era. Lemonheads. I've always viewed Buffalo Tom as the quintessential college rock band. Okay, and I don't mean that in any way negative. I think that is a huge positive. I love college rock or whatever, Buffalo Tom's debut album came out in 1989. That was the year I graduated high school and went to college. Perfectly timed. Of all the bands that I loved in the late 80s and early 90s, I kind of always found Buffalo Tom to be on an individual level, like probably the most relatable and the most kind of similar experience to me, in that I grew up and they grew up, it seems, kind of middle class, upper middle class, went to college, grew up listening to a lot of classic rock, but at some point in their teen years heard punk rock, and it absolutely 100% changed their lives. They didn't become punkers. They're not a punk band, but that doesn't mean punk rock didn't massively change your life and massively affect your viewpoint and how you see things moving forward with the rest of your life. I said I have been a fan for almost 35 years, but I've never seen Buffalo Tom in concert. It seems kind of strange, but I was racking my brain, when could I have possibly seen them, and I came to the conclusion that I haven't. However, that changes this summer because the band is going to be appearing on the Outlandia Festival in Nebraska, August 8th and 9th and 10th, I'm sorry. They're playing on the Saturday, and this is a festival that I work at. So every year when they ask for suggestions for bands, Buffalo Tom is one of the bands I've always suggested. I don't have any sway necessarily. I'm not one of the people that makes the decisions, but I do want it on the record that I did say Buffalo Tom for many, many years. So before we get into talking about the albums, I am going to be just talking about studio albums, okay? Not compilations. They have a great A-sides compilation, a great B-sides compilation. Those are separate to themselves. I'm not going to be talking about those. I don't talk about live records. We're not talking about singles or EPs. This is just full-length albums. Coming in at number 9, which means technically my least favorite, is the band's 6th album, Smitten, released in 1998. Now, before I get into the content of the album, let me just say that I don't like the artwork. Okay, this font is absolutely unreadable, and I hate that. Unless you're a death metal band, there is no point in making the writing on your album so difficult to read that you have to wonder if you're even getting the right CD. That's just, let me just get that out of the way. Okay, it's a minor point, but I just wanted to make it. The album was produced by the band along with a producer named David Bianco, who I read that the band chose for his work with Teenage Fan Club. Not sure which record he did with Teenage Fan Club, but I'm not a huge fan of what he did with Buffalo Tom per se. I think there's a lot of weird noodling and stuff that he's doing on the album that just doesn't mesh well with me. 1998 was a bad time for guitar-based indie rock. It just was. It was kind of the end of an era. A lot of these great bands were calling it quits or fading into obscurity. Bands like the Lemonheads, Dinosaur Jr., Not a Surf had a big record the year before. They crashed the year after this. Superchunk was a year or two from going on a long hiatus. Spoon did a record for Elektra. They got dropped. They were gone for about 3 years. So this was a bad time for bands like Buffalo Tom. And it seems to me that when I listen to Smitten, it is a good album. I like it. I mean, I absolutely do like it. But it feels like it's a band really without direction, without purpose at this time in their career. And I could be just imposing that on them, and maybe that's not the case. But they don't seem to have a purpose here other than to make another record. Like, I guess it's time. Oh, okay, it's time to get that record out. Let's do this. And that seems to be it. It seems almost like the real creative spark was maybe kind of fading a little bit. They were just kind of keeping it going. Again, I could be wrong about that. I don't know. That's just the feeling I get re-listening to the album now. I maybe didn't sense it that way back in 1998, but that's kind of what I feel now. But really, all the songs are great. The performances are really good and everything. And I think it's some of the production enhancements that kind of bother me occasionally, and they don't really add much. Like the song Not In It. There's all this weird electronic noise and shit going on, and it just distracts me. I mean, I don't know if they were consciously trying to sound more modern for that era, or maybe this Bianco guy is known for this kind of stuff, but I don't think it added much because the songs were already good from the beginning. You didn't need to add all this goofiness to it. The album opens with a Chris Colburn song, which is unusual. You know, those two, Bill and Chris, split the vocals. Initially, Chris didn't sing at all, like on the first record, and then it was like maybe 80% Bill, 20% Chris, and over time, it's not quite even, but it's maybe 60-40 at this point. It opens with the Chris Colburn song called Rachel. Great tune. It was one of the singles. It's a strong song. The album closes with the most overtly rocking song, which is a tune called Walking Wounded. Again, I like the album a lot, but it does feel a little bit directionless, like the band is a little bit lost, not sure what they're doing at that point in time. And right after this album, they did go on a nearly 10-year hiatus until their next record came out in 2007. So maybe I'm right on this one. Favorite songs on this album are Rachel, Postcard, White Paint Morning, and Do You In. Coming in at number 8 is the band's album, 3 Easy Pieces. This was their 7th album. This is their first album after coming back from a nearly decade-long hiatus. Now, during that time, the band never broke up. And apparently they would do a show or two a year, maybe. They did a song here and there, but they were really on the back burner, and the guys got into doing whatever else they were doing with the rest of their lives. Getting married, getting jobs, whatever they were doing. The album is self-produced, and I do say it has a little more vigor, let's say, than Smitten, which was the album that they had made prior to their hiatus. So they're coming back. They're feeling a little invigorated after their hiatus. I like it, okay? In the interim, since they left the scene in the late 90s and now they're in 2007, a lot of new bands have emerged in the underground. So the underground indie rock scene had kind of died in the late 90s, but it was definitely restarted in the early 2000s. And at this point, bands like Bright Eyes had come along. Death Cab for Cutie, Rilo Kiley, just to name a couple that had this element, this college rock, this kind of folky element, along with loud guitars on occasion, and emphasis on songwriting, and not on beats or tracks or whatever. It was like they were inspired by a lot of the same stuff as Buffalo Tom. Maybe even inspired by Buffalo Tom. Who knows? I think the album is really solid. It's a good mix between the quiet and the loud songs. That's always been a thing for Buffalo Tom. They're very good at doing both, actually. I tend to like the more overt rockers, but I'll tell you, when I'm in a certain mood, I want to hear something that's a little bit more emotional and a little bit more kind of, I don't know, on that sort of quieter vibe. Production on the album does feel a little bit flat, and I don't know what to attribute that to. It's not in a distracting way. It's just like it just lacks a little bit of punch from some of their earlier records. But again, it's not going to distract me from liking it. I like lo-fi stuff, so I don't really care on that score. There's a guest appearance from Clint Conley from Mission of Burma. I have a funny Mission of Burma story as an aside. I saw them years ago, and the night before I bought a hoodie at the show, and I guess I was staying in the same hotel as them, and in the morning I got up to go get breakfast, and I was wearing my hoodie, and Clint Conley, who I didn't recognize, walked up to me and goes, "Hey, nice hoodie." Funny story about Clint Conley. Anyways, he's a guest on the song Renovating on this album from Buffalo Tom. My favorite songs on this record are Bottom of the Rain, September Shirt, Gravity, and Hearts of Palm. Okay, coming in at number 7 is the band's 9th album, Quiet and Peace. This one was released in 2018. It was produced by the band and I think mixed by John Agnello, who also worked on an earlier record from Buffalo Tom. He's a great producer, engineer, mixer, and the album sounds exquisite. You know I said on 3 Easy Pieces it was a little flat. Definitely not the situation on Quiet and Peace. Sounds great. Sound-wise, I would say the album reminds me a little bit of Big Red Letter Day from 1993. Now, we haven't discussed that yet, but that is their most commercially successful album. Kind of reminds me of that, kind of on songs like Overtime, Lonely, Fast, and Deep. They kind of have that sort of a feel. Has a really rocking opener with All Be Gone. However, most of the album is pretty subdued and pretty mellow. It is called Quiet and Peace, so that maybe was your first hint that this wasn't going to be like the self-titled album or Birdbrain or something where they're just like raging. These are older guys now. They're in their late 50s at this point, and they're in for some quiet and peace. The album features a Paul Simon cover song, closes out the album, The Only Living Boy in New York. It's a nice version. Okay, my favorite songs on the album are All Be Gone, Freckles, Lonely, Fast, and Deep, Least That We Can Do. But again, I like the whole record, honestly. Okay, coming in at number 6 is the band's self-titled debut. Now, this might be throwing some people off because it's kind of in a lower position. And I love this album, and of all of their records, I've maybe heard it the most, I would say. The album was produced by the band along with Jay Mascis of Dinosaur Jr. Jay was a friend of theirs, was probably instrumental in getting them on SST Records, which is the label that released this thing. And he had a heavy hand in the production. Anyone who's listened to an album that Jay has produced, not just Dinosaur Jr., but I mean the Firehose record he did or some others, he takes a very heavy hand in the production. And it caused the band to get what I view as a very unfair nickname at the beginning of their career, as they were called Dinosaur Jr., because critics just dismissed them as sounding just like Dinosaur Jr. And I don't think that's fair. I mean, but they're almost asking for it when you have a song like Impossible, which has Jay doing the lead guitar, and then it does actually sound a lot like Dinosaur Jr. The album is rough, it's ragged, it's just pure emotion and passion in the performances. It's just shit is just pouring out of them. You can tell. They're not working on refining it or worrying about their dynamics. They're just letting it hit you. I would say the production is pretty grungy, but like that's appropriate for the time. I mean, 1988, 89 when they would have made this. And I have no aversion to lo-fi or grungy production. There's just a lot of the grungy production on this one. But even though this was rough and raw and their debut, I could say all of the elements of what became the Buffalo Tom sound, or what is the signature Buffalo Tom sound, were present on this record. Especially if you look at the song The Bus. It's got a slow acoustic start, then it kind of explodes in emotion, and then it kind of comes back down. Maybe Walk Away, you could say, is like that as well. But that is the kind of the quintessential Buffalo Tom. Starts mellow, they just explode, and then they kind of come back down and remain mellow. And they were doing that right from the get-go with the first album. So like I said about the production, I mean, totally appropriate for the time and doesn't really bother me. It's great on the rockers like Sunflower Suit and stuff where they're just really raging. It's on the mid-tempo stuff, it makes it a little bit that's where the flatness of it kind of you find in that one, just because there's just no dynamic. It's just one way, one direction. Best songs on the album are Sunflower Suit, Reason Why, Flushing Stars, Impossible, Racing, really the whole record, awesome. The debut from Buffalo Tom comes in at number 6. Coming in at number 5 in my catalog ranking of Buffalo Tom is the band's 8th album, Skins, from 2011. The album was produced by the band like their 2007 album just prior. It opens with a sort of an atypical kind of rocker. It's this song called Arise, Watch. And it's weird. I don't know who it specifically sounds like, but it doesn't sound like Buffalo Tom to me. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just different sounding, but it is one of the better songs, and it's cool. It's just different. I don't know how to describe it really. Then you got a Chris Colburn song with She's Not Your Thing, and then you get into the song Down, which the beginning opened up a little bit like Taillights Fade, I kind of thought. But overall, I think the closest sonic resemblance with this record to if you're going to compare it to a previous album, would probably be the Let Me Come Over album. Maybe a little bit of Big Red Letter Day, but mostly Let Me Come Over kind of era. One of my all-time favorites, Tanya Donnelly from Throwing Muses, Breeders, Belly, solo career. Does guest vocals on a track called Don't Forget Me, which kind of comes off a little bit like an R.I.M song. It's acoustic, it's got mandolin, it's got Tanya singing on it, Bill Janovitz, Chris Colburn, all singing at the same time, 3 vocals. It's really, really nice. The single from the record is called Guilty Girls, and it is awesome. I mean, that song is as good a single as they've ever done. I know most people consider Taillights Fade to be their best single or their best song or whatever, and I'm not here to argue with you on that one, but I do think Guilty Girls is just as good as any song that they've done. It's a phenomenal single, and if it had come out in another year other than 2011, perhaps it would have gotten more attention. I do think this is a really, really strong album, and definitely the best of the albums so far of the 2000s from Buffalo Tom. Coming in at number 4 is the band's 5th album, Sleepy Eyed, from 1995. This was produced by the band along with John Agnello, who I mentioned earlier, mixed, I think, Quiet and Peace. This was the follow-up to what was their most commercially successful and highest charting album, Big Red Letter Day, which came out in 1993. So in a sense, there was maybe some pressure put on the band, like that was your big record, you've got to follow it up with something even bigger. You know, perhaps because it's a follow-up to their most successful album, which was 1993's Big Red Letter Day, this album does seem a little bit more raw and stripped down and more like power trio mode. It gives me a little bit more of a Birdbrain type of vibe. That was their 1990 album. That was their second album. Starts off really rocking with the song Tangerine. It's got Rules, It's You, Your Stripes, Sundress, Souvenir, all of these kind of rockers. It's really, really one of the more, I keep using rockin', but it is one of the more upbeat and like faster kind of Buffalo Tom albums. I always wondered if the song Sundress was sort of a lyrical throwback to Sunflower Suit on the debut album, their first single. I don't know. Bill, maybe you can answer that in the comments. My favorite songs on this one are definitely Summer, Kitchen Door, When You Discover, and Sunday Night. Again, coming in at number 4 is Sleepy Eyed. What's funny is most of the time when I do these catalog rankings, when I get down to the top 3, they're almost interchangeable. Like, it's really, really difficult to decide what is 1, what is 2, what is 3. But I had to make a decision, so here's the decision that I made. Coming in at number 3 is the band's 4th album, Big Red Letter Day. from 1993. Now, this was the band's most commercially successful album. It actually charted on the U.S. Billboard Top 200. It hit on the Billboard Heat Seekers chart, which was hit number 8 on that. It hit in the UK Top 20 albums chart, so it was definitely did well in Australia. It was the biggest record that the band had done. The album was produced by the Robb brothers, whose credits are lengthy, going all the way back to the 60s. They've worked from everyone from Cher to the Lemonheads. They give the album a really, really bright, radio-friendly production. The guitars are generally a blend of acoustic and electric guitars on most of the songs, so it's not as harsh sounding as maybe, Birdbrain in the first album were. Maybe that was the R.E.M. effect. I mean, people like to talk about the early 90s as though it was only Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and the really heavy bands. But remember, R.E.M. was peaking out in the early 90s as well. There was no band more popular. Even Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, whatever, like R.E.M. was right up there at that same level, and so maybe that had something to do with it, I mean, this album had a number of singles on it. I'm thinking it was Soda Jerk, I'm Allowed, Treehouse, I don't know if Would Not Be Denied was a single, Dry Land, I'm not even sure, but like pretty much every song on this album is amazing. And even though this is number 3, okay, my qualification is if you're new to Buffalo Tom and you're thinking you want to try one album, I would actually start at Big Red Letter Day. I think that's a good entry point, and then you can expand, either go backwards, go forwards, whatever. But it's a phenomenal album, and again, my 3, 2, and 1 were really interchangeable. I mean, any of them could have been number 1. My favorite songs on the record: Dry Land, Soda Jerk, I'm Allowed, Would Not Be Denied, Anything That Way. Really all of it, though. Okay, and next, coming in at number 2, is the band's third album, Let Me Come Over. I've always been confused by this cover art because, again, there's no words on it. You didn't put the name of the band. I'm not the art director here or whatever trying to tell you what to do, but that is a little bit odd. It was 35 some odd years ago. Maybe they did put a sticker over there. I don't know. Anyways, this is largely considered the band's breakthrough. The most commercially successful, of course, was Big Red Letter Day. But this was the band where they kind of broke free of just the serious underground. And now you were up in the alternative world. You're getting played on 120 Minutes on MTV.
Buffalo Tom.
And, they were joining that upper echelon of indie rock bands that were around at that time. The album was produced by Paul Corderi, Sean Slade, and the band. They hired an outside mixer named Ron St. Germain, who has been involved in a lot of records. He's, as a producer, as an engineer, as a mixer, he sometimes does the radio mix to try to get it bumped up for the radio. I don't really feel like, after listening to this album 500 times, that they were really thinking of the radio with it, but I mean, I don't know. Times were different back then, and the mentalities at record companies were always very different. So if it was a situation where they wanted a mix doctor to try to get it on the radio, again, I don't know whether they consider that to have been a successful endeavor or not. It is their best sounding album that they had done yet so far. It was their third album. Sean Slade was involved in the second one, but the first 2 had Jay Mascis involved, and they're a lot more raw, but we'll get to that. The album opens with a real rager called Staples, and it closes with the sort of beautiful, kind of ethereal song Crutch, which is, again, definitive Buffalo Tom. Starts quiet, blows up for a second, and then kind of comes back down, which is something that Buffalo Tom, it just encapsulates them like so perfectly. Crutch is such a good song. So when this came out, I do remember seeing them a lot on 120 Minutes. They had videos for Taillights Fade and Velvet Roof that I remember seeing. They did a performance on 120 Minutes. It's almost like on this record, sort of, Buffalo Tom started to understand restraint and the power of what they could do. Even though, just as a trio, they still had a lot of dynamic in their sound. In the wake of the grunge explosion that was going on all around them, Buffalo Tom lost the grunge on this album. And on many subsequent albums, they weren't doing a heavy, louder sound. Even on the more rocking songs, I say like the first song, Staples, was like Raging. But it's Raging by Buffalo Tom standards. It's still just like more aggressive than their average stuff. But the first two albums definitely fit in that kind of grungy side. But they had abandoned that at this time. You know, all the raw emotion and everything that was pouring out of them on those first two records is still here. They just learned how to keep it more under control. And, you know, there's some really, really beautiful songs on this record. Stuff that you didn't even know they were capable of doing if you'd only heard the first two. Like, they took it up to another level. Porch Light, to me, is like the definitive Buffalo Tom song. And that makes everything going forward, like this is where Buffalo Tom found themselves with that particular song. Now, if you ask most Buffalo Tom fans, what's your favorite song of all time? And maybe I would say this too, maybe Taillights Fade or Velvet Roof, and they're both on this album. Hard to beat, right? Overall, favorite songs on this one are all of them, but if I had to pick a few, I would say Velvet Roof, Taillights Fade, Mineral, Larry, Stymied, Porch Light, all great. Crutch, I mean, again, phenomenal. Number 2, Let Me Come Over. That only leaves us with one album, folks. It's the second album, Birdbrain. Kind of a surprise. If this were a sports video, I would consider it a homer pick, in the sense that I believe this to be the first Buffalo Tom album that really hit me, that I connected with. A lot has to do with the time in my life in 91. You know, I was 20 and 19 and 20, and that's just such a great time to be around. That was a good time for music. It was a great time for everything, you know. And that definitely is I'm attaching those vibes to this album, which is not to say that it's not awesome, because it absolutely is. Now, this album is very similar to the band's debut, but the production is definitely better. Bringing in Sean Slade or whatever as a co-producer, Jay's role, I don't know if you'd say it was minimized, but it wasn't as overt as it was on the first one, though he's still definitely there. The songwriting has definitely improved off the first album, although, again, they showed signs of greatness on that first one. It really comes up a notch on Birdbrain. My only complaint about the record, honestly, I think it's pretty much a 10 out of 10, is the drums are so fucking loud. Like, why are they so loud on that record? Well, I know why. Because they probably asked the drummer, what do you think about the mix? And he's like, turn it up, because every drummer wants the drums much louder. But I do say it's so loud they're distracting. I mean, it's so bizarre, okay? Among the singles for the album, like Fortune Teller, the song that really, really connected with me the strongest is the album closer called Bleeding Heart. It's the one that made me latch on to Buffalo Tom probably forever. The lyrics are it's just pure emotion, just raw feeling, and you can sum up what he's saying in the song is, I feel a lot. Sometimes it doesn't stop. Sometimes it will not go away. I will tell you, that song resonates with me big time. Even now, 34 years after first hearing it, knowing exactly what to expect every time I hear the song, it still connects with me on that just visceral level. And when the band plays, I don't think they play that song because it was never like a single or anything, and it was such an old song. But if for some reason they felt like, dusting it off and playing it at their show at Outlandia Festival, I wouldn't be offended, folks. Best songs on this album are, of course, all of them, but my favorites are Birdbrain, Fortune Teller, Bleeding Heart, Crawl, and Skeleton Key. Again, my number 1 from Buffalo Tom is the album Birdbrain. Folks, I hope this did something for you. Again, you'll want to check out their new album, Jump Rope, which just came out. All of these albums are good. Just because they were lower in the rankings doesn't mean they're not worthy of checking out. If you are new to Buffalo Tom, there's an A-Sides compilation, which is a good place to start. Or honestly, Big Red Letter Day is a great place to start. And then you have a couple albums backwards and a couple albums forwards to look forward to. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Take care.
So, you have a MySpace page or something?